Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of Admissions Live. I am your host, Ashley Hennigan. I want to introduce our guest tonight, Dawn Frazier. Dawn, I want to thank you before I get you on screen and tell you how much you've been a part of launching Admissions Live with me. Your enthusiasm and support have been incredible, and I don't know that I could have done that without you. So thank you so much, and welcome to the show.
It's a great opportunity for us who really care about this profession and the industry to engage in these kind of frank conversations that we really need to have about the state of the landscape right now. The economic piece is just, is really something that I think everybody's just really trying to survive right now. This isn't the first time the economy has struggled, and as far as higher ed goes, you can go back to, the 80s and see a really difficult period there that higher ed was able to overcome. Right. I think what's unique about right now is the demographic shift on top of the economics, and we haven't seen that. Nothing like this before when you think about the economics and the demographics combined. So that's definitely a challenge, and it means we have to think about things very differently. Yeah, and it's really important to really look at the big picture here. We have to make some determinations about what's going on, and we have to think more creatively about how we're working with partners. For example, if we have a lot of corporations out there that are saying we can't fill these jobs. We've got we don't have qualified workers coming into the field. Well, how can you as corporations impact that from a much earlier stage? How can you work with colleges to cultivate students who are going to fill those jobs admirably? So I think there's a lot of, like you said, we're going to keep using the word opportunity, but there are so many right now. And I think if we're looking at the big picture, then we have to take them all into account because this is a very different time.
I'm seeing students that are concerned with cost a lot sooner than they have ever been before.
And we have a responsibility and really a moral obligation to make sure that we are being upfront with them about the cost.
You get that question about relevance.
Is college worth it? And we've got, and you could say we've seen this before. This isn't the first time this conversation's been raised. It's just, as you said, sort of a perfect storm of opportunity on one hand, but of course some challenges that people are facing. So they're saying as they see the rising cost and the continued rising cost of college, they're saying, does it make sense? Am I going to get out of this what I'm investing financially here? And so it is a really tough one right now, and people are just wondering, is it worth it?
Right, and it's coming back to that value proposition, which is going to be very different for every single student. It always brings me back to what I like to talk about, which is that perfect fit for the student. On our side of the table, though, are we providing students with all of those things that they need to make those informed decisions about fit?
Colleges really need to sharpen their message, identify and come to terms with who they are so that they can let students know easily who they are as an institution. As you mentioned, fit, and students and families being pressed to be a little more sophisticated about searching for colleges. We don't want them to search long and hard to figure out what your institution is all about. If you can sharpen that message, then you're more likely to have students applying to your school that have a deep interest in your school for what it's actually worth and what you have to offer. But I think this is a time to do a little reflecting and examining what your college is all about and sharpening that message so that the consumers have a better sense of what they're purchasing. The challenge, I think, for colleges is to find these students. I think if you don't have a name in a particular city or an area or a community, then breaking in is difficult. We have to get creative, and colleges have to say, well, who do we need to partner with? There are a number of community-based organizations, for example, who are doing incredible work with students, and colleges need to find ways to get into those organizations, meet their students, understand what they're doing with their students. There could be some great opportunities for partnerships. I think we've seen this with international students. When you tap into certain communities, they will continue to come, and if those students are meeting with success when they come to your campus, then your name is going to have some weight in that community. So I think one of the challenges is really finding those students and getting creative. There are so many definitions for fit, but we do have to understand that families are really trying to figure this out. Gone are the days of the gut feeling and walking on a campus and saying, this is going to be it for me. With families being strapped for resources to send their kids to college, they are really trying to take a harder look at, is this the place for me? So how do we as admissions, in the admissions field, help inform that notion of what fit should be for students and families? For families who have not purchased college before, you could say it's you're buying the invisible. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it means. I've never purchased this before. Right. So if we can help them understand what this means, then we can help them make some better decisions. And if it's not our institution, then that's probably a good thing. If we're clear and they understand that this is not a good fit for me, then they're going to go someplace where they're going to be more successful and both parties win in that kind of situation. I think students are looking at some different metrics these days. I think the traditional ones everybody can name: size, cost, location. Do they have my major? Well, these are all important things, of course, but we need to move beyond that. For example, students need to start looking at graduation rates and retention rates at colleges. This is what the savvy shopper should be doing. If I'm a black male and I'm applying to college, then I can't look at the overall graduation rate. I need to look at the graduation rate for black males at your institution. And if it is 20 percentage points lower than the overall graduation rate, I need to ask why. The second thing, which I think is very much aligned with what's going on with the economy, is looking at resources like the career services that colleges offer. Gone are the days where you walk in like spring of your senior year with your resume and say, all right, I need to find a job and maybe they can help me clean up my resume. Students need to consider those services as they're enrolling. If you're talking about the investment and your likelihood of completing, which is the goal, then you need to start asking some different questions.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Admissions Live. Tonight, I'm joined by Michael Zarek. He is the founder of College Counseling for the Rest of Us, and we're really excited to be talking about first-generation perspectives throughout the college admissions process. Michael's spent most of his career working with first-generation students. I would like to say hello to my guest, Michael Zarek. We're going to bring him on screen right now. We're going to get this conversation started about first-generation students, what they're going through in this messy process that we call college admissions. So, hi, Michael. How are you doing?
Hello, Ashley. I'm doing well. Great. Thank you.
Yes, that is the hashtag, Admissions Live. I love it. We've got props tonight.
I think a lot of what we're going to talk tonight about covers same advice you'd give to second and third generation students, because it's such a various and sundry group of students. You have what we think of as your traditional first generation college students, those who parents did not go to college, grandparents did not go to college. You also have, though, first generation college, first generation American, where this is the first generation in the United States as well as the first generation to go to college. You also have, though, students where the parents may have gone to college, but in another country. So while the parents know college and they've experienced college, they haven't experienced the American system and all the idiosyncrasies of EFC and SAT and ACT and all of that good stuff. And a growing group is the first generation adult college student, probably the least talked about and probably the most lost group. So, and I'm probably missing some groups in there, but at least 4 major groups.
Going out and starting this college search process, how is that going to be different for a first generation student? I know it's kind of a loaded question.
I think the biggest issue is trusting their gut. They don't have an adult who's been through the process before. The clients I've worked with, they tend to have good instincts. They just don't trust their instincts. They don't know who to rely on, and they don't know where to turn. So oftentimes they're turning to Aunt Jane or Uncle Joe, but they really don't know who are the experts, who do they rely on.
When they're going through this process, who's actually doing the search? Is it the student that's doing the search? Is it the parent? Is it both? What do you usually see?
I tend to see one of two models, completely opposite. It's usually
Okay.
either the parent is so uncomfortable with the process that they let the student lead, they let the student do the search much more, or they are so unsure of the process, they want to make sure they don't do wrong by their student, and they completely hover over the process and become the stereotypical helicopter parent.
What is confusing about this search process? And where are they getting bogged down? Where are they getting apprehensive?
I started in college admissions in 1988, and I think we put out far more information than we did in 1988. And you would think that would be a good thing. But I think for so many, it's just so hard to go through the 4,000 search pieces and the 15 texts and emails that you received today and sort out, well, what's important? What should I be looking? Because I can't read all of this. I can't read all of this literature. I can't read all of these websites. So somebody tell me, what's this? The other hard part, I think, is the terminology. We speak our own language, and sometimes we don't realize that. And I think it can be confusing to any family and any student, but I think particularly with first generation because they don't trust their instincts.
I think one of the points that you made earlier in this conversation that really kind of hit home to me is that these students and parents are not trained admissions professionals, and we tend to take this lingo and the tools that we use for granted. And talking to someone who has never seen this before, you told me to take the approach of having a new employee on the set, and how you would begin to start explaining this process to them. And it seems like such a logical route to take with a first generation family, but it's not the route that we always take. When we're talking about college fit, which is my favorite topic to talk about, and we're talking about first generation students who are going through this process, and we know as higher education professionals that first generation students have a really low rate of retention and completion in higher education. And that is one of the biggest challenges that I think higher education faces. So as an admissions professional at kind of the front of this funnel, what is it that we should be paying attention to make sure that the student is finding the right college fit, and hopefully in turn that fit will help provide them a space where they can succeed, where we will find higher retention rates among these students and completion rates too?
Well, and first, let me agree entirely with you about fit. I used this quote in my last blog: a match to be made, not a prize to be won. A student may visit a school and say, this is great. I like this. I like the faculty. I got to know them. I was impressed with the facilities. And then turn around and not see that anybody's ever heard of that school, or it's not in this list or this ranking, and feel very insecure about that choice. Right. So I need to stress fit as much as you, but probably the best thing, I use my other prop, is the visit. It really is the best way for a family and for a student, particularly if they're not familiar with the process, one, to become very quickly familiar with the process.
Sure.
And two, to have a better sense, this is the school that's right for me. This is a school that's going to get me where I need to be in 4 years, as opposed to the prize, so to speak.
How are you seeing students react to maybe those more non-traditional ways of being able to interact with college admissions office, or doing a virtual campus tour or something like that?
The virtual visit certainly is an important piece. It certainly has its place. Sometimes it's the lead-in to the physical visit down the road. One of the other things, I don't know if I'm jumping here, but we had talked about blogs, and I think that's, you want to help them through the process, but you don't want, as I speak to admissions professionals, you don't want to be patronizing. You don't want to do a one-size-fits-all. And I think the idea of blogs, the idea of, oh, that person reminds me of me, or that person went through what I went through, or went to a similar school, or parent blogs, where for a parent who's equally unsure, in some ways as a parent you feel worse about being unsure in this situation, seeing a parent that's gone through this saying, oh, okay, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one. And I think that's an opportunity that can grow in the future, is more parent blogging, but just the idea of a student being able to go through a virtual visit or a website and say, I recognize that individual, that person, they did it. I could do it there. I think that's an avenue that can be continued to be explored, student and parent blogs.
How are we able to kind of convert these students into feeling comfortable? You mentioned they have trouble kind of leaning into their intuition and going with their gut. So what is it that admissions offices can be doing to kind of help in that post-accept time?
I think it's the admission orientation student services role to make sure that the first generation student understands the importance of the outside of the classroom experience. Mm-hmm. For parents, it's different. No longer can they call up the guidance counselor and complain or voice their feelings in the same way. And when sometimes they find, well, what do you mean I can't see the grades unless 3 pages are signed? And it's a different experience.
Is there any kind of insights that you can give, some of those top questions that you might see from families as they are navigating through this process for the first time?
How am I going to know how I pay this? And that may sound, for someone on the admissions side, overly simple, or for the financial aid side, overly simple, but it's not. I think the more simple and intuitive we make our website menu choices, the better off it is.
I think we can always do better with our transparency, and transparency now is becoming more clear to me that this language that we're using and these terms that we're using are another barrier to entry for these students.
I'm a big believer, if the difference is not great, and everybody defines great differently, and every family defines great differently, but you want a school you're going to graduate in 4 years, or maybe 5. You want a school you're going to graduate from. It's going to be a lot more cost effective to finish that school than pick the school that was a little more affordable, and then you come home after sophomore year with a 1.7 going, I don't need a new school. That's going to cost you a lot more, even though you save $2,000-3,000 up front. So
sure.
I think that's part of the education process. That's hard coming from your side. I think that's where my side and the guidance counselors have to be diligent. Mm-hmm. Is be aware that the money that you save or lose because you choose a school that's right for you, or a school that you're not, you choose the fit or you don't choose the fit, mm-hmm. is far more important in terms of finances, as well as everything else, than $2,000 or $3,000 comparing financial aid packages. So that's a hard lesson to explain to somebody, but
yeah, great
point. What I try to stress is you're going to save a lot more money if they finish in 4 years than if they take 7 years at 2 different institutions taking 150, 160 credits.
Sure. Sure. Great point. I love that. What are the biggest takeaways that you could give to both the admissions counselor at the university and the school counselor that's trying to help these students find their right college fit?
It would be visits, virtual, but particularly on-campus visits are so important. It would be, from both sides, look for peers, student tour guides, student bloggers, anybody who you say, I can identify, and if that person's succeeding there, maybe this is possibly a school for me. It's the idea of calendar. I think the more, as these families receive so much information and try to sort through, and oftentimes simply just block it all out, the more we can say, this is the page you should be looking at, or this is the website you should be looking at, or this is the date you should be fully aware of, because if you don't make this date, you'll lose out on that scholarship, or you don't get financial aid, or you're going to miss the admission for that program. The more we can cut through the other pages that are important to other students, the better we serve those students. And again, as we said, terminology. Speak the language of the family. I don't know that this is strictly first generation. It's not. But make sure that the family knows what you mean when you say AFC, or knows that when you say our average SAT is 1250, that you mean out of 1600, not out of 2400, mm-hmm. unless you mean out of 2400. So, right. And it's so easy to fall into that trap. You've just been trained to be this great admissions counselor speaking the admissions language.
Sure.
But the ability to translate back to layman or what have you, or to student,
right.
is so important. And yes. I think it's a hard skill. And I think the more we can do that, the better we serve, particularly the first generation, because they're the ones who least understand those terms and are most uncertain about what they think they understand.
Well, I think that's a great way to wrap up the show. Again, if you have more questions for Michael, catch him on Twitter at MichaelCCR. I would like to introduce my team of students. Tonight our guests are Aaron Sapinka, Jacob Sachs, and Emily Oki. Aaron's a second-year journalism major at RIT in the College of Liberal Arts. Jacob is a third-year packaging science major in the College of Applied Science and Technology. And Emily Oki, who's been with me for a few years, is a fourth-year graphic design major at RIT in the College of Imaging Arts and Sciences. This student ambassador team was started in 2010. It was partially because of my desire to really connect formally with the student ambassadors that were already a part of our admissions office and get them interacting on Twitter and on Facebook with prospective students. The other part of this project and how it kind of came to be was a student interest too. So Emily was one of the students that was really interested in using video content on our website. So she kind of came to us with her ideas about leveraging video, and that just all kind of fit into place. So we'll talk a little bit more about how the project got off the ground. Without further ado, I'd like to bring the team on. Say hello. Hi guys.
Hi.
What made you decide that you wanted to be a part of this project?
I started with admissions 4 years ago, and when I applied to RIT, I was really drawn to the blogs because it kind of helped the waiting period in between getting accepted and then coming to school. So I checked the blogs often, and I really wanted to come in and be a blogger. And so I got the job initially for that, and it kind of snowballed into starting everything we've done so far.
Jacob came on last year. Jacob, how did you get brought into this mix?
So I actually applied just to be a tour guide and also to work in the office. There's other responsibilities many student ambassadors do. And during my interview, I was asked what interests I had, and I was like, well, what all are offered? And I was mentioned as social media, and I was like, I don't really know what that is as far as student ambassadors go. So the counselors interviewing explained it to me. I said, seems pretty interesting. I've got a good background in Facebook. I've been aware of Twitter and done some video projects in the past. So I just caught on interest and took the job and ran with it.
And so for those of you that might be on my side of the table, we did an interview search for all of our tour guides and office support. And we also, at that time, were interviewing for social media. I had a colleague of mine come out of the interview with Jacob and say, you want this student, he's going to be perfect. So that's how Jacob kind of got brought into the fold. But Aaron, you applied directly to this position, right?
Yeah.
What about you? Why did you find that social media posting so appealing?
Well, because I'm a journalism major, a lot of my classes have been focused around the social media aspect already, and it was just another way for me to get involved and to learn more about something. Plus, I always wanted to be a tour guide, and I'm really school-spirited, so it kind of tied two loves together, and as soon as I saw the social media aspect, there was like no question. That's what I was applying for, because I love Twitter, I love Facebook, and I love being up on the up and up with what's coming in social media-wise. I'm actually quite addicted to it, so it was right up my alley.
Are there any other characteristics maybe of yourself or some of the other students that are on the team? This team is actually up to about 8 or 9 students at this point. So are there any other characteristics that make you or maybe some of your other teammates good fits for this social media ambassador role?
Well, definitely with Jacob and then another girl, Allie, they're all really involved with campus life. So the fact that Allie is actually the president of her sorority, so she really knows what's going on all the time with campus life, and I think just having a good involvement and good school spirit with the campus is a strong quality of both of them, because they're always at the events. Like if I go to an event, I always know to check to see if Allie or Jacob is there, because probably they're going to be there. If I don't know anybody going, they'll be there.
I'm going to say something about Emily because I know she's a little bit shy and probably wouldn't say this about herself, but Emily has an incredible leadership quality to her that I would not be able to do this project without her. And in kind of the lessons learned section of my presentations, I've talked about you cannot do this job without an Emily. You need to have a student leader on the team that can really keep things together. So that's absolutely a quality that I looked for. We also have a student on our team that has a bit of a theatric background. RIT Kevin is really great at coming up with storylines, and that helps us a lot when we get into some of our video projects that we're doing. So a storyteller or a theater major or a past thespian is a great addition to the team. For those people who might just be starting this project, how do you get started in something like this?
I think when we initially started, sorry.
Good. Yeah, you can start.
When we initially started, it was kind of going off of our strengths. So I was really into the blogging side of it, so we tried to push blogging. And then this year, we're kind of growing it and like morphing into new things, like based on how comfortable we are. So I guess it's starting off with, you can set up an easy Facebook page. It doesn't have to be anything in depth. Or starting off just like basic Twitter things, and it kind of builds from there.
Right, so last year, I think you're right, we did start off with promoting what we were already doing, but promoting it out in other social media spaces. And I think that was a great way to start. It got us all familiar with the other kinds of platforms, and we didn't have to add too much. Now this year we're able to kind of leverage more out of that blog platform and do more video blogs. Now that we're more familiar with the video camera, video blogs are definitely more popular. How do you stay organized as a group, and how do you keep all of your tasks together? How do you stay on task?
So obviously we can use our Twitter accounts to network with each other, but a main thing we do is through our Facebook group that we keep between our work, we keep a lot of documents running of sort of active to-do lists, things to look out for, schedule planning, when we're going to have what episode done, who needs to shoot what on what day of the week, who needs to come caption videos, whatever it may be. We always have tasks assigned, and we try to weekly meet, at least as a whole group, once a week, and then go from there.
Yeah, we also try to keep like really important minutes from each of our meetings, or like if something important happens in maybe just like my office hours where I'm the only one that's working on something, I make sure to post it like ASAP to our Facebook page, and I tag in everyone that it's important to, like if we need certain footage, highlight who needs to go out and get it or things like that.
And I guess adding something in on the negative side of things, we do sound really organized and pulled together. But for people starting out, don't freak out if not everything goes right. We have days where we're frantically running out to shoot something. We're frantically emailing everybody to get captions pulled together and things.
Just last week, actually, the captions weren't working for one of the episodes, and I had to go to work, and I was actually captioning, so I just literally typed up what the person was saying in the video, put it on the Facebook group, and said, anyone that can put this to the actual video, please do so, because I have to go to work now.
Emily, I'm glad you bring up some of the challenges. Are there any kinds of examples that you guys can think of projects when things just didn't work out for you?
I can think of something pretty specific. During finals week, I was going to do a little like video vlog documentary of my, not meltdown, but like as I stayed up till 3 o'clock in the library one night and then had to take an exam the next day. I even did the vlogs and like recorded them and everything. I just never had the time to actually post them. So I have these great vlogs. It's just that when it came down to it, my time just wasn't there to get them captioned and up on the internet. So that is one of my personal failures that didn't work out. It was a good idea. It's just it wasn't in the work. It just didn't have time.
Yeah, and Erin, you've mentioned captioning. That is part of the process. Can you tell folks a little bit why we make sure everything is captioned and why you guys are so dedicated to making sure that any kind of video content we put out there is also closed captioned?
Well, our school has a huge deaf and hard of hearing population. And so that's out of a sign of respect for them is to offer the content that's captioned already. Plus, as many probably have seen, the YouTube captioning that's sometimes automatically generated is horrible. So what we do is we actually watch through all the videos several times and either have to caption from scratch or caption editing the one that YouTube has transcribed for us. And sometimes that's even worse than starting from scratch because everything's so off.
Definitely, but it's doable, right? That little bit of extra work makes it accessible to so many more people. And other things that you think about, not just because of the deaf and hard of hearing community, but sometimes you mumble your speech or you're filming someone and you just don't understand what video game they were talking about. Or maybe you have someone that is watching the video in a noisy area and just wants that captioning there as an added support. So I think it's great that you guys are committed to doing that as well.
I was going to say, for like a 3-minute video, it takes me 30 minutes maybe to caption it, and I'm like a perfectionist where I put all the right commas in and so I think it would take 20 minutes for a 3-minute video, if that.
Let's talk a little bit about what you guys are actually doing and what technology are you using. So if you could run down the hardware that you use, what do you have at your fingertips to help you get this job done?
Well, so for our videotaping, we use iPod Touches that shoot HD video, just like this one. Those we can quickly dump in on our computer, which we put onto a server. So if I shoot something, Trevor, who is our master editor, can go in and edit it right away. Go and grab it right off the site. He can be back at his dorm room doing that.
To give people an idea of what the scope of this project is actually like for you, what kind of things do you find yourself doing every single day as a part of this job?
I tweet a lot. I love tweeting, and that all I need is my phone. It takes 5 seconds, and I literally tweet about the most random things that aren't going on campus.
I mean, I'm always on Facebook, me personally, especially that I have a smartphone. I'm always carrying around, checking it, not during class, of course, but between classes, always checking to see what's going on, what's happening. I'd be sure to check the accepted students pages, and I jump to my Twitter app as well.
So you mean to tell me that you don't go on Facebook during class?
I was going to say, I'm on Facebook. That's the most time
I'm on Facebook during class.
Zinch was asking about how many hours students are putting in, and I saw Emily tweeting out back saying about 10 to 20 hours.
I think the hours definitely depend on what part of the season we're in. And so sometimes it's just putting out blogs, and then frequently, most recently, I guess, it's actually putting out the videos. So it's people coming in and out, editing, making sure that we're, on Fridays, we make it a point to go out and shoot during our meetings. On Mondays and Tuesdays, we're usually editing. So we've kind of got a schedule down. You know what day of the week it is and what you need to be doing.
All three of us here are in different colleges, as Ashley mentioned before. So we really get a chance to expose our audience to what not only our programs are about and what our daily lives are about, but all the students around us that we're around every day. Every college basically has its own building, so we get to go in and out, shoot that. Just today, Aaron and I were going around talking to engineering students about why their college is so great, why they really enjoy being engineers at RIT.
To do a quick recap, the students are on Twitter and Facebook almost every day. They're working on weekly episodes on their YouTube channel, so producing. This year we've upped it to 2 different video series. There's also the blogs that they're working on, but long term, what are the things that you're hoping to achieve this year? What can you use some of this content for and leverage it for bigger projects?
We're definitely starting to take stuff more in the immediate. And so rather than filming stuff that's not going to be seen for a few months or not going to be seen for a few weeks, just this past weekend we had Freeze Fest, which is like a festival on campus for winter. We're shooting for a long-term video, but we're also tweeting and showing pictures for that. So it's really getting in the habit of going out on campus on any given Friday and doing live streaming.
Yeah, we do have the videos that capture life as a student, but what's going to really make it seem like a real picture of what college life is like is with the daily updates, like seeing what we see going to class or what we stop at Freeze Fest, getting a free hot dog or something like that. And we're really looking into the idea of live streaming. We have a festival that comes up in May called Imagine RIT, and we've just started talking about that as a possible live streaming event, which I think would totally be awesome. And it doesn't take, it's not going to take all that much. It's going to take a computer and then maybe a couple extra cameras or something around campus to catch all the cool things going on. But I think that would be an awesome live streaming experience. That's what I want to work towards.
Are there any kinds of guidelines for what you tweet?
Yes.
I was talking actually Ashley today about how my friends don't understand what I tweet about because they tweet about like different like parties and stuff that they do, and I talk about school and all these different things. They're like, why do you talk like that, and why don't you tell us about your life? And I'm like, I am telling you about my life. It's about like my school life, and this is what I do, and I'm being appropriate about it, but I still tell people what's going on.
I guess the point that I want to make is that we haven't written down any of those guidelines, right? So when I asked the question, I expected you to say no, but you all unanimously said yes. So that was really cool. We don't have strict guidelines as to what you can tweet about and who you can tweet to and what should be going up and what time and how much. I think a lot of that understanding and the reason why we don't have to do that is because you all are part of our ambassador program.
I think the big part of it I see is in our Twitter names. They all start with RIT. They're all RIT underscore and what our name is. So I think of an RIT account. It's not my account personally necessarily. It is about me, what I'm doing. But everything I should be tweeting about should be related to what my involvement is at RIT, whether I'm going to some cool campus event like a Friday Night Live show, or I'm going to do some philanthropy work, or we even have a meeting with these guys. Like it shouldn't be about what a lot of people put on Twitter these days about their everyday action, whether they're going out, hanging out with friends. It's about what we do on a regular daily basis as RIT students.
Actually, that's come up for debate before too. And Emily, I know I've had this debate with you, whether you should have your own personal account, whether it's, it's Emily Oki or it's Jacob Sachs, or it should be this RIT Twitter account. And does that lose any authenticity because of that? In past conversations, you felt it should be the RIT name, but can you explain a little bit about why we do that, or why you feel that it should be that way, or not, if you want to change it?
Well, I was just talking today about how I don't know what I'm going to do when I graduate, so, but I guess sometimes I forget that I have it. I don't really tweet anything that's particularly, there's nothing really to hide there, and so I feel like it's giving people a real life view of college. If whoever's following me on Twitter is going to know when I'm stressed. But I guess it's kind of the same thing for employers.
Yeah.
It kind of goes both ways. I don't want to be tweeting stuff that employers wouldn't want to see. And it's kind of the same thing for prospective students. So
definitely.
I guess I don't really filter anything for that. Well, I filter it, but...
Like a big thing I know right now is I've just gone through the last week of going through a career fair looking for cooperative jobs that I've accepted. I know that when I turn in my resume and I turn in my interview, companies are going to look. They're going to go see what kind of activity I have in social media. Especially I do talk about it a lot because it is a pretty good quality to have to be able to communicate through social media and know how to network with various sites such as Facebook and Twitter. So I know that companies are going to be out there looking for it when I get to the full-time market. And there are times that what you have on a social media page could affect you getting turned down for a job or even for an interview. It inspired me even to do a presentation in class a few weeks ago for a public speaking project to talk about why social media is taking over the workplace.
I think having a basic knowledge of what social media is and like who can see social media has put my guidelines into place. It's not this job specifically. It's me knowing that someday as a journalist, people will be being able to look at all the different things I've posted online and not wanting things that I deem inappropriate to be able to be found. Even without social media, internet is permanent. You can't get rid of things. So that's always just been a personal thing with me, is just like, okay, guidelines here.
What gets the most response from the prospective students?
I would say definitely Facebook. Twitter's starting to pick up a little bit more, but it's still not a very wide audience in terms of people knowing what Twitter is. Hashtags
especially
are still,
in high school.
Yeah, especially high schoolers still don't know what a hashtag is, aren't really on that, but Facebook's really where we can reach people. I think we had some statistic of, it was like 85%, Ashley probably knows better, of the prospective class last year was all on our Facebook page for accepted students, and so it's reaching a really wide audience, and we're able to push our videos out that way and get to most of them.
Awesome. Are you guys in agreement? So platform-wise, Facebook number 1, Twitter number 2. If those are the social media platforms, what out of the content that you're producing do you find people responding to the most?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I see is on the accepted students page that we set up every year with the opportunity for the prospective students to ask us questions through the forums and discussion boards and ask us things that they may want to just ask a student about what their experience in student life, whether it's housing, meal plans, classes, the quarter system, whatever it may be, to know what it's going to be like when they get here, and to have that bridge between having that student leak of somebody who's out there reaching and helping you out, sort of leading your way into college. So when they get here, they have somebody to go to still about asking questions, and they still are here first couple weeks of freshman year, and they have their resident advisor, they have their orientation assistant, but they may want to ask each one of us still individually. I know I've had some friends I've met, like my sophomore year, their freshman year, that they knew me because of the Facebook page and because of reaching out to me. So that's a really big thing to see, is that it really does connect, and it leads them to that partnership with you all the way into their college life.
What do you find is the biggest challenge in your role? What is horribly difficult?
Probably remembering to video or document something before it happens. We just actually kind of picked on one of the people that we work with, Kevin, about it, because when we were going out to ask questions, he wouldn't start filming until after a certain point, and he would miss like the really good reactions or the really good points of view or quick statements that someone makes like right off the top of their head. And so I think that's the hardest part, is probably just like being always aware, like, oh wow, something interesting might happen in the next split second. I should be prepared for it.
I think most difficult for me, and Emily, I think you'll probably agree on this, is we try to do probably a lot of things at once. I think we try to do 2 or 3 episodes, working on 2 or 3 episodes at once. I know right now, today, we're out filming stuff for a 9x9 series, we're filming out stuff for our regular series, and we're brainstorming blog topics, we're talking about Imagine IT. So we're doing a lot of different things at once, and it's about balancing all those project management together.
I guess sometimes the hardest part is actually getting the videos from people. We can plan all we want, but when it comes down to it, like the videos need to be in by Tuesday morning or something like that. So sometimes it's a little bit like pulling teeth, but luckily we do have Twitter and Facebook and everything, so I can spam people on multiple accounts of get your videos in now. They probably don't appreciate it.
What kind of support do you need in this role? Is there anything that you would say students absolutely have to get this job done, or is there anything that would make your job easier?
I think Emily and Ashley actually came up with this calendar plan, right? Like when Emily was talking about the 2 weeks before, where we realized what we originally wanted to do probably wasn't going to work out, is getting the plan and then figuring out how we were going to film for each one.
I think the other big thing of support is having somebody like Ashley who's really open to, I'm allowed to do it. Having somebody like Ashley who just allows us to do pretty much whatever we want. And I mean that in a good way of, she's really open to, if we want to try more video blogs, we're switching over to that.
She loves video
If we
blogs.
want to try out some new social media thing that's just come out, like we can try that. So it's really having the flexibility to do whatever works for you.
And just like Emily just picked on Ashley, I got to pick on Emily, because as Ashley keeps saying, having Emily here as that main group leader.
Thank you, Jacob.
We have to. It can't be done just by Ashley. It can't be done by just us together. We gotta have our Emily, and it's gonna be tough to lose her in a few months here, but hopefully we'll have another one.
They haven't actually accepted that she's leaving yet.
Yeah.
So.
No. If budget weren't an issue, and we didn't really talk about, the cost of putting this together, supplying you all with the iPod touches and buying the editing software and those kinds of things. The majority of what we got started with were free social media tools. But if you had your wish list to the university Santa Claus that could just deliver anything that you could possibly want, what would be on your on that wish list?
I would like 5 people who are not in classes and could commit all of their time. But I guess they can take classes too. But just 5 people that are really committed and wanting to learn more about it, even if you aren't familiar with Twitter, like the desire to go out and do that.
Yeah.
So.
I think we should get some GoPros that you can just walk around with, like strap on your arm and just capture every moment throughout the day.
A personal film crew to follow me around throughout my life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Personal film group. GoPro, I've heard that before. That's the camera that you can strap under your head.
The true Hollywood story film crew that's following your life every day.
Yes. And hair and makeup, right?
Yes.
That's what I'm waiting for. Special thanks to Emily and Aaron and Jacob. Welcome to Admissions Live, the weekly web show for college admissions professionals. We're part of the Higher Ed Live network, where we strive for digital development and professional empowerment. I've got a good friend, Brandon Croak, on tonight's show, and we're talking about the use of private social networks for prospective students and admitted students. We're going to be talking about trends we see coming down the pipeline in 2013's recruiting cycle. I want to bring him on. Hello, how are you?
Great, Ashley. Thanks so much for having me.
No, thanks for coming on. I'm excited to do the show.
Great. Well, I'm excited to be on Admissions Live for the first time, and I've got my higher ed shirt for conference season, so I'll be seeing you this fall at NACAC and High Ed Web and a few others, so hopefully you can see you in some of the Admissions Live crew around the country. The plan is just to promote higher ed spirit. We all work in an industry. You know, every industry has their own little quirks and ups and downs. We happen to sell Facebook apps to higher ed, so the Facebook like and the higher ed shirt has been a big hit at conferences. So we just been giving those away and share some spirit and some fun. We should have some fun. We're working with students, social media. This should be a fun thing, in my opinion.
It is fun, and higher ed people are awesome people. I think these are conferences that you go and you get a lot of hugs, which I really like. So
absolutely.
Digging the shirt for sure.
Super excited to be involved in higher ed, social networking, a lot of interesting developments. A lot of schools are using different strategies. I'm here to just talk about private social networks, although there are a lot of other social networks, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah.
But it's rarely something I see covered in the conferences, which I think is a disservice for the kind of possibility. And a lot of schools are using them, but mainly when you go to a social media presentation, it's about a Facebook page, it's about a Twitter account, kind of generic platforms, I'll call them. Some people call them third-party platforms or consumer platforms. But I definitely want to separate there's a difference between kind of social networking and students connecting with each other and social media messaging, kind of institutional messaging from channels, which I'm sure we'll get into a bit later.
For those folks that aren't currently using what we would call a private social network, let's try to define that for them and maybe talk a little bit about the basics of what that private social network looks like and why you might use it.
So I would say a private social network is a branded online community specifically owned by, the particular institution. And so although, maybe a private Facebook group could be kind of like a mini network, the functionality and limitations for all the generic platforms are a lot. And it's a lot about institutional management, fitting into how they need to track data and manage student questions. And really for the student side of things, it's really how they want to interact. When we asked the recent survey that we were talking about of what percentage of students think that college should provide a private social network for their fellow students, it was about 75% of the students said that they should provide a private social network, which is the same data point as Noel Levitz Expectations found about 3 years ago, 2009 study. So students definitely want to connect with other students. As I like to say, Facebook became so popular at Harvard because students wanted to connect with each other at Harvard. They didn't necessarily need to hear more messaging from Harvard. Now, as Facebook grew to kind of take over the world, institutions obviously wanted to engage with students on those channels, and so they setting up Facebook pages is a lot of the initial kind of foray into exploring how to engage students. But I think the Facebook page is really a limited tool as opposed to an actual community where it's a student-focused platform where it's really the students to connect to each other, and there can be some institutional connections and messaging, but really it's an equal playing field between the institution and the student rather than a top-down messaging approach from a Facebook page. And I'm not saying to get rid of your Facebook page by any means. I just want, when we start talking about social networking and student engagement, I think there's a whole different kind of paradigm of looking at how can you connect your student population in meaningful online communities versus just connecting with your students with your content update, with your news, with your photos, which is absolutely one part of the equation. But I think today I want to focus on that other part, that student-to-student connection.
I do run a private social network at my institution, and I think you said it best when we were on the phone a little bit earlier, but can you talk a little bit about how you view these private networks as transition networks?
Yeah. I'm not sure if there is academic literature about this, but I see really the private social networks as an ability to transition from your friend graph and everybody who's influencing you in high school, which obviously is an important part of your life, but really you're looking to take that next step. And you don't want to have to post or feel limited in your identity of maybe who you were, who your friends were, or what kind of likes or interests you had in high school. Obviously, some of those are going to remain the same, but a lot of students want to have their next step and their next journey and their new interests and what they want to get involved in on campus. And I think separating yourselves or having the ability to go off that current friend graph and that current online identity to this new place provides a lot of freedom, and it's something that's rarely talked about with students and how they develop. But I can tell you from personal experience, I became a completely, not completely different, but definitely took another step in my development coming from high school, separating from my high school peer group into college. And then once I had a really good college peer group, even graduating and then going, and I was really more involved on Twitter, graduating, looking at the job market and connecting around social media. So I always had this new digital way to kind of take the next step and connect with people I wanted to learn from or really had a shared interest with, which is how I got the job at Integrals, connecting with Michael Staten, who founded the company, was through Twitter. And my friends in college weren't really doing that, but I had that ability to talk about these new things with this new platform. So I always think there's a place for kind of shedding old skin and creating a new profile or kind of creating something new that's going to lead you towards your future.
And I think that's spot on for what admissions professionals are trying to do. We're trying to find that one student at a high school across the country that is going to be a good fit at our Institute of Higher Education. And a lot of times there's something really unique about that student that makes them a good fit for you. And that student might be a one-off in their high school. They might be the only student that's interested in microelectronic engineering, but they've done a lot of research on it, and the students that they might have already connected with on social networks don't get that. They don't understand those kind of unique idiosyncrasies that make the student who they are. And when you put them into a network that's full of people like them, maybe now for the first time they're meeting people that are more like them, it's a great place to be able to kind of start new and connect with people and share things that are unique to you in your own academic life, and how that might transition over into your social life at college. So I think it's a really important point to make, and I'm glad we're able to do that. I want to talk a little bit about what's coming down the 2013 pipeline. You mentioned that at conferences, this isn't a topic that gets a lot of play. Tell us a little bit about what you see as being popular for this year.
Yeah, I mean, we really see, and if you ask anybody who studies the social networking space, that the future, people say, what's the future of social media? And the future of social media really is people gathering around highly relevant niche communities. And if you look at all the sites, there are a million sites out there, and there will continue to be more and more every day. And as they get a certain population, maybe there's people that are really interested in certain things and they gather on Pinterest, or maybe they love taking photos and they're on Instagram. As students are kind of joining, as certain pockets of students are joining these different networks, institutions seem to want to have a presence on those, and trying to just spread themselves across all these different channels. And what I really see with the private social networks is the niche community that's really useful for students is going to be something that the institution owns and manages and designs, and something that really helps the student and helps the institution manage that relationship better. So the future of networks is not only important to follow the next shiny object, but to have something that's really specifically designed for your use case in mind. Whatever the school is looking to do, or that the student is looking to do. Students, when they're going off to school, they're looking to make friends and get questions answered. Are the top two things that they can do online. And institutions are looking to make sure they're finding the right students, being able to get the students through the admissions process, making sure they end up showing up for campus and not getting cold feet. Or I saw that you had the Harvard researchers on studying summer melt.
Yep.
There were 3 reasons students melted over the summer months. There was financial barriers, which is absolutely an issue that we focus on with private social networks, but the 2 others, social anxiety and informational barriers. And the use of social networks, you can help relieve that social anxiety by connecting with peers or getting questions or fears answered, or that informational barriers, being able to have targeted communication based on a student's behavior on social networks, which I won't go into completely because that's very focused around our product. But there's a whole new level of insight, really, that I think we're just scratching the surface now in the higher education community with social media, going from originally Facebook likes and impressions into more student-specific behaviors that they engage with the institution, and the specific affinity groups that they have, and then the messaging and reporting that can kind of be used based on that social networking data can really be used to improve the student experience. So, for example, talking about the messaging, if there's 3 students who are interested in robotics and they create a interest group around robotics at your school, they don't have to get made fun of in the Facebook group because they're the only people that said, hey, is anybody else interested in robotics? But when they fill that out in their profile, it allows them to connect directly and create that new community. So I think that new profile is a really important feature from so many different aspects, but when I say, well, the student gets to create a new profile, they're like, oh, well, so what? They already have a Facebook profile.
Right.
It really just allows for all this new information. And that information about the student, that student likes robotics, and they're also from this town, and that they haven't made any friends yet in their online community. So maybe that's somebody that needs to be reached out to, or maybe they're creating their own communities and creating their own clubs, and that's somebody you could reach out to be a student ambassador. The next year. I mean, there's just so many different ways you can take the analysis when you've got really in-depth look at your student body.
One thing that was really important to me was that kind of directory search that you don't have access to if you're just using something like a Facebook profile. Facebook's not going to let you search by the major that you have at your institution or the college that student was admitted to. So many different variables and boundaries that you have to overcome on a platform like Facebook, that if you customize something yourself and you put these students in a private network where everything is designed for them, that kind of directory search that a student is given is a really powerful thing. What kinds of things are you planning on discussing with the new research that you have rolling out, and is any of that supporting those trends that you see?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, taking a step back, the first question is really should colleges, our prospective students, when you're recruiting this new senior class, are prospective students even checking you out on social media sites? Because a lot of people are spending a lot of time updating content and measuring effectiveness and optimizing the content and planning it and getting it approved and responding to content. And so you wonder sometimes, what is my prospective student audience really engaging in that, or is that the current students, or is that alumni that are engaging? And so what we saw was that out of the high school seniors now, 72% of the students had reported of researching a college via a social media site. So that data point is pretty high. A majority of the students, maybe 3 out of 4, I'll say, have looked at your school via social media presence. Now, we don't know if they're researching the social media and checking out your school's account, or if they're literally messaging their friend on Facebook. It's kind of up to the student's interpretation of the question. But we were specifically asking a lot of times about schools' profiles on social media site. And then we asked another question, saying, do you even think colleges should have a social media presence? And 2/3 of them said yes. 20% said they didn't really care either way, and 5% said no. So I think that breaks down, on average, students are for this type of communication. They're obviously spending more and more time on this. I don't think the question is, are they using it? Are they looking at colleges? I think the question is now is what's happening now, and what do we really want to, where are we headed with all of this?
Right.
I'm definitely a futuristic thinker, and as I see more and more networks created, I don't see more and more time of the day being created. I have to run, the messaging and on our social media accounts, and it's hard enough to manage, a few accounts, let alone you're trying to. I see sometimes at the bottom of an admissions email, talking to an admissions professional, and they say, well, make sure you like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram, pin us on Pinterest, add us to your circles on Google+, and, yada, yada. And it's like you tell somebody to do 7 things, they're going to do nothing. I don't have the stats to back up that the students haven't done those things in the email signatures, but I just see them and just think they seem a little bit tacky, rather than, if you have any questions or want to meet your future classmates, join us here. And that type of profile, I think, once you have that one community, is a really important connection point. And you can have within that connection point, you can add those other profiles for students to kind of branch out. But really, that central hub of student to institutional connection, student to student connection within the institution, I think, is a really important connection point to have.
You want to connect your prospective students with each other. You want to connect them with other current students. You want to connect them with admissions counselors, and you want them to be able to talk and build a relationship with each other. A lot of the other social networks, those that you're mentioning, the Pinterests, the Instagrams, the Twitter even, is much more about messaging and kind of being able to show what your campus is like in real time. For those, it's really about either generating content or pushing out marketing messages, and less about connecting students with each other and letting them form relationships with each other. I guess you can make an argument that those networks do that on a certain level, but they're not designed to do that. It's important to kind of aggregate that content back to your website, or maybe even aggregate that content back into your private network so that they can see those things all in one place, and they're able to do the most important thing, which should be building the relationships, understanding the social atmosphere at your college, and being able to make those important decisions to apply or to enroll. And it takes a lot of your time. So when you talk about using Facebook because it's free, you can't discount those human resource hours that you're dedicating to it. And I think you've done some research and done a little bit of writing on this too, right?
Yeah, and there's an article we wrote about the 5 hidden costs of free social media marketing. But that's another great thing about the community. Creating a community is you're creating a place for the students to connect with each other. So the content, you don't have to be pushing out and feeding the content beast all the time, because the students are creating that content with each other. They're creating that message and the dialogue, the questions that they have, the interests that they have. So I really think getting out of the way and letting students make friends and get involved on campus and learn about clubs and organizations, that's a great thing to have. And although you can do, you can do a lot of different messaging, it's really hard once you get so many likes on Facebook to have that targeted messaging capability. And you're left with trying to please everybody and pleasing nobody, rather than creating these niche spaces where students can really connect. And on the measurement aspect of it, when you're trying to create content for all these different networks and then measure, is this being really effective? Am I doing this right? And the niche networks the private social networks allow you to have a whole new level of insight into the measurement and the effectiveness of it. When you know that a student has made a certain amount of friends with their institution, that's much more likely predictor of if they're going to enroll in your school, the number of Facebook friends they have in common, versus if they've liked your page or not. And that's all the interesting things that we're diving into with our data analysis team, is just looking at trends of correlating what online social networking behaviors correlate with enrollment outcomes and really positive student outcomes, whether that's their retention rates or their yield rates or their likelihood of depositing. All of that can be tracked when you take the data from a private network and correlate that with your CRM or SIS data. That's a really interesting, I see that as the future in the next few years of what we're looking to do, and what institutions want to do is lay a foundation that's meaningful for students, and that's providing institutions with the type of data they need to be able to manage their incoming class and gauge the size and be able to make sure that they're going through the process efficiently and effectively. And they don't need to spend all the time creating all this social media content. You can let the students have the fun themselves, and you can just kind of be there, really just making sure the tone's appropriate, the questions are getting answered, and then even stepping in once in a while and showcasing different events on campus, all can be happening. It's really just a walk. Our VP of products, Nick Punt, is really always talks about managing. It's a win-win relationship that we have to walk with the students getting what they want and the institution getting what they want. And sometimes they're very different things. Sometimes they overlap. And I think a private network where they can connect with their friends or peers, is a good overlapping of those needs.
Data for me is what I see myself involved in the future in social networking. The more we can customize these networks to fuel data to our CRMs and to our own institutional goals, the better we'll be at our jobs and the more accurate we can be to the students that we're then going to be marketing back out to. So thinking down the funnel on the other end, the kind of data that LinkedIn is collecting on our alumni is incredible, and it's more accurate than what our alumni CRMs are building. For an alumnus to want to update their profile in our alumni network, that's really low on the priority list, but on their LinkedIn profile, it's much more high priority. And so that's where my mind is going when you talk about data. What kinds of things can we build into our private networks to be able to track what kind of a student is interested in enrolling, what kind of actions do they take in the network, what kind of a profile do they have, and where do they come from, and all of those kinds of things we can collect with much more accuracy than even tracking things through the applications that we get. So I'm really excited about where our private networks are going and what kind of a data mining we can do with them to make our jobs hopefully a little bit easier, but at the very least more accurate. And being able to then go ahead and recruit the students who are taking certain actions and then coming to campus and being successful students on our campus, being successful alumni, if there's anything that we can track as early as the prospect or applicant or admitted student stage, I think that's helpful for everyone. So data is absolutely huge, and again, not something that you can count on in a public free network to provide you. That's going to cost you something, but is it worth your return on investment? I absolutely believe it is. I want to talk a little bit more about what other challenges admissions offices face and how you can use these private networks to overcome things like communication reach to students and students' preferred communication channels that they have. What's out there in private networking that might help address that huge communication challenge that we have?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a really important point about personalization and segmentation, that no two students are the same, and when a student fills out a private social network profile, they're filling out where they're from, what they're interested in, and then you can have them opt in for our networks, the internal networks. You can have them opt in to whether they want to be notified of things via text message, iPhone notification, email, or Facebook notification, so it allows them to really choose the communication channels they want to receive. So, I mean, there's mixed research about, text messaging students. Is that invasive? And I think, I'm not sure if it was a Noel Levitt's stat or not, but basically a lot of people in the industry said, well, students don't want to be texted. And I think they don't want to be spammed, but when we asked our focus groups for our research team, they say, well, what if you have a really important deadline coming up? Would you mind getting the text done? Oh, yeah, please. I need that reminder. So there's a difference between, just being able to spam people and send them all these different messages, or being able to give them what marketers dream is the right message at the right time, which is never going to be perfect. I'd be lying if any solution ever gives you that, but there are smarter ways that I think we can do things, and hopefully better ways we can track and segment communications to make sure you're engaging the students that aren't engaged, or sending that relevant information about the marketing meetup that's going to happen in the first week of campus. I mean, all that's really a powerful way to reach students in a way that they opt into. So they can kind of choose their fate, or they can end up opting out. So I think that individual student social profile, that interest profile, that social profile of where they're from, who they are as a person, that provides a really rich environment to send those targeted messages. But it's not something that my CRM has the capability of doing at that level. That's a really meaningful level.
Absolutely. We have the technology. Have I seen a CRM that's robust enough to do everything that we would want it to do? No. Are there ones out there that have the capability of doing it? Yeah, but we're not quite there in terms of customization for the student yet. Other kinds of things that you see as opportunities coming out of these private networks for admissions folks?
So I'm really excited with prospective students beginning their college search and wanting to connect at an institutional level. We hear this from time and time again from students. They want to connect with two groups, and this is what we saw in the research, is they want to talk to their admissions counselor. That personal relationship is extremely important, and they also want to connect with current students and see what life is like. So a lot of times these prospective students are going out and doing research, and they're asking, these people, well, hey, what's it like? But if they don't have a friend at the school, not only are they less likely to enroll that we've seen based on data, but they don't have somebody to go to and get that resource. So providing something with a private social network where the prospective student can say, hey, I'm interested in marketing and so, and I'm from Ohio. Can you connect me with somebody like me on campus to answer a question or have a quick chat? I really see so much potential for that personalized one-on-one connection for prospective students to have that insight from a current student, which is what I had with my brothers. I followed the footsteps of kind of where they had went to school because they had a really great experience. But being able to have somebody you can bounce ideas off of and ask, either the admissions counselor, current student, and then eventually admitted students that they want to connect with, all of that could be managed through a private social network. And I was thinking about this earlier. I was going to say that the institutions could have better control, but they don't have. That's not true. There's no control in any of it. But I think a solution like that can help manage these relationships better and make them just more efficient for both parties. And I think that's what we call social enrollment management is the term we've come up with kind of the future of the students connecting online through social networks to learn about universities. But I don't think that means, I've seen people interpret that saying, well, we need to have better messaging and we need to plan our content more and all that stuff. And I just don't think you're going to optimize or solve anybody's needs when you've got 20,000 Facebook fans or maybe 2,000 or what have you. And so all of those data points lead me to think that there's really a need for this other kind of solution that can make these connections.
It's really easy for a student to make their college list these days. There's a lot of websites available to them that can form a college list of places that they might want to go according to their academic and career plans. They can get that done in a study hall. But the next place that they're going to go, I guarantee you, and we heard this at the StayMates Teens Talk panel, they're going to go to peer review sites where they can view other students' thoughts about the institution. And if you're able to instead bring them back to a place where they're connecting with your current students, that's much more powerful in my mind than even the content that you might be generating in newsletters and I do all sorts of content generation. That's part of my job, making YouTube videos and doing that kind of fun stuff to show students what it's like on campus. I'm not saying that's not important, but that real meaningful connection is something that I think students will take a lot from.
Looking forward to sharing new research in higher ed. All of the data talk that we've been talking about with private social networks, you can find that specific information at integral.com/data.
If you have more questions for Brandon, you can follow him on Twitter at @bcroak. I want to thank Brandon again for coming on. This was so fun. We're going to do this again because I like it. Welcome to Admissions Live, the weekly web show for college admissions professionals. I'm your host, Ashley Hennigan. Tonight's guest is Jeff Salingo. You can tell how excited I am. I can hardly speak. I am thrilled to be speaking with Jeff tonight about his insights into the value gap in higher education, and I want to get right to the show, but you know I can't do that without first thanking the sponsors that make Admissions Live possible. And Admissions Live is sponsored by Welcome to College, who believe it's all in the visit and who have created web and mobile applications to help institutions measure and manage their most critical recruitment tool, the college visit. Visit welcometocollege.com to learn more or tweet at Welcome to College for a demo. Admissions Live is sponsored by Zinch, the preferred destination by over 3 million students to research schools and scholarships and to showcase themselves as more than a test score. Over 1,000 colleges and universities around the world partner with Zinch to attract and enroll best fit students on the largest college search social network in the world. To learn more about Zinch, email outreach@zinch.com or tweet at socialadmission. Admissions Live is sponsored by Integral, the creators of the Schools app on Facebook. While 100% of colleges are using social media to engage prospective, admitted, and current students, only 1/3 of enrollment managers are happy with their metrics and results. Learn about social enrollment management during Integral's upcoming webinar tomorrow, December 5th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and we just sent out a tweet with the link to register for that. And last but not least, Admissions Live is sponsored by Scavenger, a Google-funded mobile game about going places, doing challenges, and earning points. Learn how your institution can get started with Scavenger, as well as read case studies and interviews with some of the 400 colleges and universities who have already used their service at scavengeru.com. Tonight's guest is editor, speaker, author, and futurist Jeff Selingo. Jeff is currently editor-at-large at the Chronicle of Higher Education and has spent more than 15 years reporting on higher ed trends. I had the pleasure of meeting Jeff at the New York State ACAC annual meeting, and I'm so pleased to have him here with me tonight. So without further ado, I would like to bring Jeff on camera. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Ashley.
How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well.
Let's get started. I want to talk a little bit about your background first. And you have degrees in journalism and government, so it's not surprising that you made it to Washington. Can you tell me how you got involved writing about higher ed and what would eventually lead you to your role at the Chronicle?
Well, I actually got started writing about higher ed at Ithaca College up there in upstate New York. Yeah. Not as far upstate as you, but no. I was editor of the student newspaper at Ithaca at a time when higher education, this was early 90s, at a time when higher education was going through similar issues that it's going through now. Obviously not technology, but there was a demographic bust in the early 1990s, and Ithaca, like a number of other schools, was dealing with some issues with declining student enrollments. And so it was actually just kind of an interesting time as a journalist to be dealing with the issues surrounding that. And so always had an interest, took a detour through Arizona and North Carolina, covering technology and the environment, obviously somewhat unrelated and related to higher ed, and then ended up in the late 90s at the Chronicle as a reporter. Moved through the ranks there, covering state politics and editing our government coverage. But most of my time was spent in the early years as a reporter for the Chronicle, covering public and private universities in various states. So it was a terrific job. I got to parachute in on college campuses, probably visited almost probably 30, 40 states during that time, and talked to presidents, governors, faculty members, students. It's one of the best jobs at the Chronicle covering the states. But eventually I wanted to sit in an office, and that's what I did, and did that as editor. I was the top editor for 4 years and stepped back from that role last year to really focus on the future of higher education.
Been speaking and writing about higher ed in a way that so many of us have now been able to start thinking differently about some of the trends that we're seeing. So there's some strong common themes in here about finances and value and outcomes. Is there something that's really inspired you to hit hard on these trends?
Well, I think it's just the increasing cost of college. And obviously whenever I go to a party here or some other event here in Washington and somebody knows I work at the Chronicle, the first question I always get asked is, why does college cost so much? But in more recent months, and even in the last year or so, it was more about, okay, what am I buying with what I'm spending? I think I've come to a point in this country where we know higher education is worth it. But the idea that we are willing to spend anything to go anywhere is no longer the case. And I think that parents and students more often today are saying, what am I getting in return for what I'm spending? And that doesn't necessarily have to be a financial return at the end of the day. I think people sometimes misunderstand me when I'm talking about this. It's not all about that job and that paycheck, but it's really about, is the college going to provide me the experience and the academic rigor that will serve me well in the workforce and in life over the course of my life?
I do want to thank you for moving the conversation beyond that mainstream favorite question, is college worth it? And making us look a little bit deeper at the issues that Americans should be asking in the first place. Right. Yes. And we do see,
but this not to I mean, there is the New York Times over the weekend wrote another one of these stories. Should you go to college? Should you use that money to do a startup company in Silicon Valley? And what's unfortunate about those stories is that I think those stories are aimed at incredibly smart, incredibly wealthy students who could kind of do anything in life. And for the most part, I grew up in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. Kids there to really kind of get out of the lower classes in the U.S. I mean, really the only ticket to the middle and upper classes in the U.S. in social mobility is a college education.
You've been speaking around the country about the future, what the future college looks like, the jobs of tomorrow, what they look like, the coming disruption in higher education. And I did have the pleasure of hearing your keynote this summer at your alma mater in Ithaca. But in your talk, you centered it around the value gap. And that's something that I hope that you would share tonight. And so if you could kind of help us understand this value discrepancy, because that was presented to me in a way that I hadn't heard before. So can you kind of define what that is and why it's so important to us, particularly those of us in enrollment, and why we need to understand this?
So increasingly what's happening, and this is based on surveys that the Chronicle took with the Pew Research Center 2 years ago, and actually, without even knowing it, a survey that Time Magazine and the Carnegie Foundation just took a couple of weeks ago, or actually just released a couple of weeks ago. And you see the same results in both cases, where we asked Americans and where we asked college presidents about the value of higher education, not the cost, but really about what's the value of the American higher education system for the money people are spending. And in both surveys, you saw this similar gap between what presidents think and what the public thinks. And Americans are actually getting more negative on this. So they think, more than 50% of Americans think that higher education is a fair or good value for the money spent, just barely over 50%. But college presidents, about 3/4 of them think it's an excellent or terrific value. So you have the people running the institutions who think that they are providing a great value for the money Americans are spending on their institutions, while the people, the customers, and I know a lot of people in higher ed hate that word, but the customers think, wait a second, I'm not really getting out of this what I'm paying. And in the survey that we did with Pew, the most negative responses actually came from recent college graduates, especially ones who were deep in debt and were not making a lot of money in their first jobs after college. They were really questioning the value of their degree. And maybe value does increase over the course of your lifetime as you look back upon what a college provided. But I don't think that colleges, and especially presidents, who I've said on a number of occasions are kind of tone deaf to what Americans think about this. I don't think they're just saying, yeah, we're worth it. Trust us. We provide you a great experience, but they're not providing the details and the evidence to show that quality learning is going out on there, that the outcomes are great. Everybody talks about the famous alums that graduate. I can name the 10 famous alums that graduated from Ithaca College because I hear about them all the time. But how about everybody else? What is everyone else doing? What is everyone doing a year out of college, 5 years out of college, and 10 years out of college? And you know what? If colleges don't do this, others are going to fill this gap. They already are.
We're talking about the naysayers that saying, it's fine, we're going to keep doing what we've been doing, this isn't affecting us. And you've had such a close relationship with how things can change in an industry. And that's something that you presented to us at Ithaca as well. how do we combat these naysayers, because they're on every college campus, and I won't say what departments they're in, but but how do we kind of open their eyes to this realization?
Well, I think a lot of this actually is about communications. I just did a presentation at the American Marketing Association meeting down in New Orleans, and some of the feedback I heard on Twitter and in talking to folks afterwards is that my message was fairly negative. And it is. I mean, to me, it's more of a challenging message, right? But I actually see a lot of positives in higher ed, and I think a lot of institutions have this value on campus. They're just not communicating it well to students in some cases, or they're not collecting the right amount of data or the right data and communicating that to students. So I could talk a little bit about that later, like what are the types of things that I think institutions need to be communicating to students. But in terms of the naysayers, you know what? There's always going to be a group on campus that you never get, right? There's the people who are always with you. There's probably 25% of them, 25% who will never agree with you no matter what you do. And there's that vast middle that's incredibly important. And I think that over time, they believe in evidence. And so not just presenting them with anecdotes, but presenting them with surveys such as this and other surveys, because at the end of the day, it's going to be the students in the pipeline. I've spent a lot of time over the last year talking to middle school students and early high school students. It's those students that are going to push colleges to change, because they want different experiences. They want to learn in different ways. They want to cobble together their degree in different ways. And by the way, they're the ones, and in some cases their parents are the ones, going deep into debt in some cases. And they want to make sure, you know what, I'm willing to spend this money, but I want to make sure at the end of the day that I'm getting a worthwhile experience.
Yeah, so let me ask you about that, because I see that too as a counselor out on the road talking to these students. And there are the students that are focused on outcome, graduation rate, and where are your students placed. So outcomes, I think, is a piece that they can grasp, but the academic rigor part that you speak about, I tend to think that the high school students don't really know what they're getting themselves into in college. So for them to understand what to even look for, what kind of pieces should they be looking for? What is rigorous? How does that rigor translate into the real world? I think that's a big thing for a high school student to try to fold into their college search and understand. Do you find that to be true? And is there a way that we can, as an industry, better articulate what we're providing?
Well, and I think that's the issue. I mean, so when I spoke at New Orleans and recently, somebody said to me, well, are high school kids really interested in academic rigor? They really want to go to the easiest place and get an A and move on. And I said, well, for those students, by the way, they're going to go to the cheapest institution. If all they're interested in is the credential, if they're interested in getting in, getting out, and getting that credential and getting a job, and they want to make it the easiest possible route, they're not going to go to an expensive institution to get that, right? They're going to go, if their goal is the credential, they're going to go to the cheapest institution. So in terms of what to sell, I think that for those students who you can prove that, hey, we're going to give you a great rigorous experience here that will prepare you well for the workforce, not just for your first job, but for your fifth job. And talking not only about the majors you offer, but the types of classroom experiences that you have. I talk a lot in my forthcoming book about majors of the future, and I actually discourage people from trying to read the tea leaves and think about, what are the jobs going to be in 10 years and pick a major. I talk to them about getting certain kinds of experiences, getting to know, not only taking great classes, but finding great professors. So that professor-student relationship that I think so many colleges talk about internally, but never really talk about that or exhibit that externally to parents and students. We all know from our own college experiences, great professors we had. We still sometimes talk about those people. let's illustrate that more. Let's tell stories more about that. Undergraduate research, a lot of, project-based learning is happening, whether it's service learning or research projects, even as early as the freshman year. Start talking more about those projects and the skills that students are learning in those classes, whether it's working in teams, writing, public speaking, the skills that employers tell us increasingly they want in students. Study abroad. More and more institutions are focused on getting more students abroad, not necessarily for a semester, but even for short periods of time. And, and again, it's something employers want in students. They want kind of a global perspective. And I think that if institutions start talking more about those things, and less about, to be honest with you, and I hate to pick on it, but the climbing wall and the sushi in the dining hall and the great dormitories, or sorry, residence halls. The Chronicle doesn't call them residence halls. I think that parents and students would appreciate that. It's refreshing.
I really appreciate the point that you make about faculty, because I don't think faculty stories and even just faculty biographies are showcased in our literature, on our websites, like they should be. Some places you can't find anything on faculty. Sometimes you get, a name and maybe an email address and phone number, but you really don't have the depth that you could have. What are they writing? What's their background? Where are their degrees from? All of those kinds of things are really easy for departments to put together. And then faculty, I'm sure, would like to have that information out there too. So the statistic that you showed that kind of keeps me up at night was the amount of debt that our colleges and universities are in. And it's staggering. And yet we still continue to only focus on this student debt crisis. So can you share some of your insights to that?
So I actually don't know the total number offhand, but basically since 2000, the amount of institutional debt, the amount of debt that institutions have taken on to build buildings and do other things has grown, almost doubled between 2000 and in 2010. And institutions took on that debt to build everything from new academic buildings to new residence halls to upgrade facilities. And they did that on the thought that, interest rates were low, so that helped them a little bit. But they did that on the thought that money would continue to come in as it always has. And then the recession hit in 2008. And as you know, and many of your colleagues know, institutions across the country, particularly privates and even publics, have been spending more and more of their budgets on institutional aid, on financial aid. And so what we're seeing now is the growth in revenue is actually, I think it's at 60% of colleges now have either seen flat or declining net tuition revenue in the last couple of years. And that's real cash, right? That's real cash that is used to pay employees and to do other things on campus, but it's also cash, by the way, that you use to pay down your debt. And so where I worry is that, so institutions have taken on this massive amount of debt thinking that the admissions channel that they've always had will continue on forever. And I think we're already seeing either institutions not making their classes or having to increase their discount rate to make their classes. So, and all that, of course, affects the bottom line. And also, I mean, I was just talking to somebody last week about the issue of deferred maintenance. And so we've built up these campuses in a way that we're about to see in the next 10 years a huge deferred maintenance bill come due, and in some cases it's already due on campuses. At the same time, by the way, you want to continue to build the latest infrastructure. Right. We haven't even talked a little bit about technology, but this idea of smart classrooms, hybrid education requires these Cisco telepresence rooms, which I've seen on some college campuses. I mean, that's $500,000, from what I know, it's $500,000 to build one of those. Yep. And I can imagine the technology will change in 2 years and they'll have to spend another $500,000 to upgrade it. So this is a big issue. And I think that, in some ways I don't blame colleges for spending that money, but they spent that money thinking the good times would last forever. And they haven't.
A lot of our campuses are resort locations for students to spend their next 4 years. And if you think about it that way, then it is a deal, right?
It is. And, the point I always make on this, Ashley, is that, it's not that I don't want college to be fun, by the way. It should be, right? It's a great time in a person's life. But my feeling is if Harvard tomorrow replaced all of its beautiful residence halls with jail cells, I have a feeling that students would still go to Harvard. And so, I have a number of presidents who come through my office and say, we have to keep up with the Joneses because that's what parents and students want. And I say, yeah, but you have to keep up with the level that you all complain, by the way. They all complain about keeping up with the Joneses. I mean, if you're offering such a great academic experience, don't you think some people might say, you know what, this is going to prove of such a value to my life in the next 20, 30, 40 years. I'm willing to live a little less for the next 4 years. I could do without that private bathroom or whatever. And I think again, if schools are selling the academic experience, I don't think they're going to have a negative outcome on admissions, as many of them I think they would.
So let's turn to a couple questions. Are there institutions that are positioned well to offer the value proposition that students are looking for?
Yes. So I think that those institutions... I'm sorry, Ashley.
Generally speaking.
Yeah, generally you don't want any specific examples, right?
I don't think so.
Okay. Yes. So I think on two fronts. I think that institutions that are, if you think about the work that George Q has done in his colleagues at Indiana on high impact learning practices. I mean, there are 10 practices well known, everything from, getting to know a professor your freshman year, the capstone experiences, the living learning communities, the service learning, study abroad, and so forth. I think those institutions that are able to illustrate how they do that and how they do that throughout the curriculum are well positioned as opposed to other institutions. And in terms of the outcomes, we haven't talked much about that, but there are a couple of institutions, just a handful right now, but I think they're increasing. And to be honest with you, the group that is leading on this front is a group of colleges most people don't think about in terms of leading on connecting education and the workforce, and that's the liberal arts colleges. I think the liberal arts colleges feel a little under pressure right now to prove their value, and several of them are doing a really good job on connecting students to what the outcomes will be in the workforce. So they're showing students, for example, what is the class of 2011 doing? And really good detailed information about the types of places they're working, in some cases salaries, and they're really making those deep connections between what does a degree in English mean and what can you do with it a year out, 5 years out, 10 years out. I give a lot of credit to many of the liberal arts colleges that are thinking very strategically about this.
You started to talk a little bit about outcome.
Yeah.
Let's talk more about that.
But really where I think that colleges and universities need to focus is on this employment question. And we're already seeing this at the law school level. The reason some law schools, by the way, have been sued is because students didn't believe their job placement numbers. And in fact, in some cases, colleges were puffing them. They were increasing them by various methods. And when I look at the job placement numbers for most colleges, to be honest with you, I'm not quite sure I believe them. I mean, most of them are, 91% of the class of 2012 is placed in a job in 6 months after. And we know those are based on surveys that only about 30% of students actually respond to or graduates respond to. I think that most of the people responding to them probably are already employed. We also don't know, are they employed at Starbucks as a barista or are they actually in their career? And no offense against the baristas at Starbucks. I think they're terrific because they prepare my peppermint mocha around this time of year, so I appreciate them. But at the same time, I think that parents and students want to know what are the types of jobs I'm going to get? And, and I shared with the folks when I was up in Ithaca in June, these databases that several states now have available. And in Virginia, Tennessee, and Arkansas now have databases that allow parents and students to look at the first year salaries of graduates by program and by institution. And these are real numbers, by the
Yep.
way. They're basically linking together the unemployment insurance records in the state with the graduation records in the state. And so you can see what business majors at George Mason University make in their first year.
Yeah, and that's really incredible.
Those are powerful numbers.
Mm-hmm. It really is. And I think when you presented, Virginia had just implemented that,
Yep.
just kind of made that public. So how has that played out in the past 6 months? Do you see that as a trend that's going to keep unfolding?
Oh, I definitely think it's going to be a trend. I have a feeling that when lawmakers, I think this is a big issue for state lawmakers, particularly on the public side. Now, most private universities are captured in these data. And I think that when lawmakers in other states see these databases, they're going to say, we want to do this in our state too, because it shows the payback of particular institutions as opposed to others. And in Virginia, for example, I just moderated a discussion about this last week, and there's been some negative feedback by the institutions, particularly that don't do well.
Sure.
In some cases, community colleges, the payback from the first year payback from an associate's degree at a community college is actually better than a bachelor's degree at other places. And I think these numbers, I'm not saying that students and parents should make all of their decisions on first year salary or on salaries at all. You know, we already have this, by the way, at PayScale, so it's not like any of this is a big secret. But I think this is incredibly important at a time when student debt is increasing. So we know, for example, that the average debt of a bachelor's degree recipient in this country is around $26,000 or so. And if you're going to take on that debt or whatever debt you might take on at your institution, I think you should know, hey, what is the success of these of the graduates of this institution? What is last year's class making in my major? I think that's one piece of the puzzle that students and prospective students and parents should consider. Not all of it, but I think it's definitely one piece.
I agree, and I think that's fair. I do want to take one more question from Twitter before we talk about College Unbound. Have you noticed more of college spending focused on PR efforts? And do you think that's a good thing? It seems like this person might have an idea that there has been an increased spending for PR.
I'm actually looking at Twitter, so I know who's asking this question.
Good.
But anyway, so I actually had a president in my office yesterday who claims that they've cut spending on public relations and communications drastically. But I also know that they still spend a decent amount on it. And we're seeing this. And in some cases, I don't blame institutions. I work in the news media that has been decimated over the last decade by job cuts. There are fewer reporters out there covering higher education, especially in the smaller communities, but even at places like the New York Times. And I think institutions feel like they have to get their message out directly to the public. I'm sorry that has happened. I mean, I really wish that newspapers and magazines and others have continued to convey that message. And so I do think there has been an increase. And I see it. I get bombarded with press releases and phone calls from PR folks at colleges, universities who all I think are doing a great job. I think they've been kind of forced to do it though because of the cuts in the newspapers.
Let's talk about College Unbound before we wrap up. And what can we expect when this hits shelves and our e-readers this May?
Well, I hope that everybody buys it. That's my commercial.
Yes.
Already for pre-sale on Amazon.com. What can we expect? I think this is a book really aimed at parents and students. Really, I had a difficulty trying to figure out the exact audience for this, but I'm really aiming it at I guess what today we would call non-traditional parents and students. I'm really aiming it at the high school market and parents there as well. But I think I've had a number of college presidents read drafts of it, and many of them told me that they hope that their boards and faculty members and other professionals in higher ed would also read it. And I think what you should expect is I kind of take you on a tour of how we got to this point. The lost decade, which I talked about in Ithaca, this decade between 99 and 2009, when I think higher ed really could have gotten its house in order to prepare for what's ahead. Then I talk about the disruption that's we're undergoing right now with technology, whether it's personalized learning or whether it's the MOOCs, which seem to be on the front page of the New York Times every other day. And then I talk about what I think the future will be, and that's an unbound future. It's a disaggregated future where students will, I think, be less brand loyal in higher education, and they will get their education by different institutions, by different providers that are not even things we think of as traditional institutions. They'll want to move around a lot, and whether getting that experience on a job or an internship or in another country. And then at some point, somebody will bind all that together, will cobble that all together and certify that as a learning experience. And I think the institutions that get ahead of this, and I think a number of institutions are already doing that, the institutions that get ahead of this and figure out, how can we bring in students through different pathways and not just the pathway we always thought of as graduate from high school in June, bring them in September, a couple of months later. I think the pathways to college will only increase in the next decade, and institutions that figure out how to capture those students at different parts of the life cycle, I think will be the ones that will survive and thrive in the next 10 years.
Great. Well, that piece enough is, even if it's not geared towards higher education professionals, that piece enough should be reason to pick it up. But as a final note for our future readers and our viewers tonight, I'd like to ask one last question. With College Unbound, you've created this resource for prospective students and families, but what do you hope that us who are recruiting these prospective students and their families are going to be able to take away from it?
I'm not quite sure you'll like it at all points. As I was telling you earlier, I have a checklist for students at the end that suggests they ask a lot more questions during the college search process, questions I don't think they're necessarily asking right now. I think the college search process, particularly the financial aid process, I think is very uneven right now. I think it really favors the institution. I think the institution knows a lot more about the student, both their academics and their finances, than the student knows about the institution. Students are somewhat to blame for that. I'm not letting them off the hook here, but I really hope that I empower students and families through this book to really realize what they're buying, what they're getting, and to ask the right questions. And I think the institutions that are ahead of the game and being not only honest, I'm not saying the institutions are dishonest, but honest with students and really giving them the experience that they deserve for the price they're paying, I think will do very well over this next decade or two. It's the institutions that I don't think have that narrative down.
Yep.
To tell me why here and not there. Why should I go to your institution, not the other institution? They look like everyone else. They feel like everyone else. I think those are the institutions that are going to be in real trouble in the next couple of years.
I want to thank you so much for taking your time on your Tuesday evening to come on my show. And I'm going to wrap things up. Thank you for tuning in tonight, and we will see you over at higheredlive.com.